Still glad that all you are here tonight. So, spring break. That's right. I didn't even think about it being spring break. Yeah. Well, it's good having everyone here tonight in person, and then also those that are watching via the internet. Usually I ask if there's anything anyone remembered us talking about last week, but you guys are usually kind of quiet, so I figure I'll just ask some questions about what we talked about last week and see if we can get the correct answers. So last week the walls were how far? How far up? They were halfway. They were joined together all the way, but only halfway up. Remember we talked about seeing the progress on the walls. It made Sanballat and Tobiah furious, right? I mean, they were, the word there is the idea of jealousy. They thought that the walls being up would threaten their power, threaten them politically, economically. You remember the first attacks that they had in chapter 2. They accused the Jews of rebelling against King Artaxerxes. But the attacks that we looked at last week were a little bit different. Does anybody remember how they were different? It was more personal, wasn't it? It talked about them questioning their strength. You know, you don't have the muscles to rebuild this. You know, what are you gonna pray the walls up? You know. Talked about their skill level, right? Tobias said, "Hey, listen, even if a fox runs up on the wall that you build, it's gonna fall down. It's gonna be just that weak." We talked about how Satan attacks us many times in the same way. You know, Nehemiah, as we saw last week, you know, when faced with criticism, okay, I typically go on the defensive. You know what I mean? I want to say something back. But did Nehemiah answer Sanballat and Tobiah when he was attacked? Did he answer their criticism? What did he do? He prayed. Exactly. And certainly if we are going to be victorious in our life, we're going to have to make sure that we spend time in prayer. Let's begin reading tonight. Nehemiah chapter 4, beginning in verse 7. And tonight is sort of the second wave of opposition. We're going to see a third wave and then finally a fourth wave. We're going to finish up chapter 4 tonight. Then next week we will see the third wave of opposition in chapter 5. The fourth wave, the beginning of chapter 6, and then we probably won't get into it the week after next, but the week after that, we will see that the walls are fully completed in chapter 6, and we'll see how the story progresses from there. But let's begin reading verse 7. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and their gaps were beginning to be closed, that they became very angry. And all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to God, and because of them we set a watch against them day and night. Then Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is failing, and there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build the wall." And our adversaries said, "They will neither know nor see anything till we come into the midst and kill them and cause the work to cease." So it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times, "From whatever place you turn, they will be upon us." Remember I said that Jerusalem was surrounded by opposition, and certainly they were here. You see Sanballat, the governor of Samaria in the north. You see the Ammonites in the east, the Arabs in the south, the Ashdodites in the west. So literally they were surrounded by all these people that had sort of come together to attack them and try to stop the work of the walls. It says here that as the walls were restored, that Sanballat and Tobiah, their anger got worse. Here it says here in verse 7 that they were very angry. That word very angry is the word wroth, which means a burning anger. They were just not a little upset at seeing these walls go up. They were consumed with their anger, and they began to plan an attack with these other people that surrounded Jerusalem. And once again, you know, Nehemiah here, he's not threatened. He responds with prayer. not only prayer, but also strategizing, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But as we read these verses, especially towards the end here, then Judah. Now Judah, these were the people that were rebuilding the walls. It says, the strength of the laborers is failing, and there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build the walls. The people of Judah, those that were building the walls, are beginning to get discouraged. They're beginning to get discouraged by all the work that still had to be done. The walls were only halfway up, and they said, look at all this rubbish. Okay, now the rubbish would most likely was all the stuff that had to be moved away so they could continue building the walls. So they were starting to get discouraged because of the work that had still to be done. Certainly the idea that these four groups of people surrounding Jerusalem had came together and decided they were going to attack and had rumors of these attacks. Certainly the threat of attack at any time would cause them to get discouraged. In an answer to the attack or the threat of attack, Nehemiah set guards out. We're going to see more of that here in a minute. Not only did he have those that were working, but he also had them guarding and protecting as well. So it isn't simply that they have enough work to be done, but now they also have to protect themselves while they work. So possible the idea of double duty was starting to discourage them. They were starting to get wore out both emotionally and physically. It's possible some people are like, listen, we jumped on this thing and it's looking good, but we're halfway through and there's still a lot more work to do here. Maybe they were at the end of their rope. As we read about some of their comments that they shared with the others, repeating these comments that their adversaries had said, I believe it's a sign that the people are beginning to lose heart. They're beginning to lose their focus. They're beginning to lose their perspective. Look at what it said in verse 6. It says, so we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. They had a mind to work. That's verse 6. Now, look down here at verse 10. Then Judah said, the strength of the laborers is failing. These are the builders. They said, the strength of our labor is failing, and there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build the wall. They have moved from a mindset to work to a mindset of, look at all this rubbish. Look at all this work to be done. It's possible that halfway through the task, that is the hardest part to push through. You think about doing something around your house or doing some project. When you get halfway through it, you're the tiredest that you've been throughout the whole project, right? But you're still only halfway there. Right? You're as tired as you can get, but you're only halfway. That's where they are at this point, and the people of Judah, they began not to focus on the wall, but to focus on the rubbish. Right? You guys probably never ever do that, do you? You don't focus on all the garbage. You focus on the project at hand at all times, right? I don't. I get distracted sometimes looking at all the things that need to be done instead of focusing on the task that is right in front of me, and that can be discouraging. They begin to focus on the negative rather than the positive, right? I'm sure you good Christian people have never done anything like that before, right? It's all Pastor Dave, and that's okay. That's okay. But that's where Satan gets us. He tries to get us to focus on the negative versus the positive. He begins trying to attack our faith, and with that comes this feeling of hopelessness. When our faith is being attacked, we need to remember the object of our faith, and certainly that is God. We need to remember that we serve a living God. A God that keeps His promises. We serve a God that is working in the background. He's working behind the scenes of every situation, orchestrating stuff and putting stuff together so that His will is accomplished. Verse 11 here, they started, not only did they face discouragement, but they began spreading the discouragement. They began spreading the message of their adversaries. What does it say there in verse 11? And our adversaries have said, those that have opposed us have said, that we will neither know nor see anything till they come into the midst and kill us and cause the work to cease. So they were hearing these rumors, but not only were they hearing these rumors, but they began spreading these rumors. Hey, did you hear what they said? They said that they're going to attack us, and we're not going to see them until they're on us. Verse 12, the Jews on the outside. Now, these were living outside. These may not have been necessarily those that were working on the walls. These were those that were just on the outside, living outside the walls. And it says that the Jews who dwelt near, that's where I get the idea that they were living outside the walls. The Jews who dwelt near came, and they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they will be upon you. So their adversaries are feeding them this discouragement, and now their own people that are living outside are feeding them this same discouragement, telling them that all hope is lost, that they're not going to be able to make it, that the enemy is too great, that the enemy is just waiting in secret to harm them and put an end to the work. This is a tactic of Satan, and we talked a little bit about that the other week. You know, anytime we're met with opposition in doing God's work, Satan is the one behind that, pushing for that work to be disrupted. You know, and discouragement was a battle that Nehemiah and the people working with Nehemiah had to face. But discouragement's also a battle that we have to face in our lives. And if we're not careful, we'll start listening to what Satan has to say to us, that discouragement that he puts in our head. And then before you know it, we start believing it. Before you know it, we start sharing it with other people. You know, it's sad that these Jews that were living outside the walls were allowing themselves to be used by Satan to spread discouragement. You know, I couldn't count on two hands. You know, the times I've seen in ministry and the times I've seen in churches where people have been torn apart because of negativity, you know, and people being negative about what God is doing and be negative about what the church is doing and what the people of God are doing. You know, we as believers, we've got to be careful that we don't let negativity out of our mouths, right? I mean, it's bad enough that it gets in our heads, but then to spread that negativity, you know, I think the church, believers, ministry, we'd all be a whole lot better off if we just kept our negativity to ourselves, right? Once again, we got to get focused on the big picture. And as we see here in a few minutes, you know, Nehemiah sort of refocuses the people on the job at hand. They had got their minds off the job. They had got their minds on the rubbish, their eyes on the rubbish. They had got their ears turned towards the discouragement. Their mouths were now repeating this discouragement. And Nehemiah says, "Hey guys, we got to get refocused on the task at hand, and we need to be that. We need to be that in our lives. We need to be that in our homes and in our communities, in our churches. The one that comes along, those that are maybe getting discouraged, even those that are maybe spreading discouragement, and say, hey, listen, let's get on track. Let's focus on what God has given us to do, and let's put our passion and put our eyes on that. Sometimes, and like I've already mentioned here, you know, you had people doing double duty. You had those that were guarding, but then also constructing at the same time. So it's possible that they were just wore out physically. And certainly when we get wore out physically, we can get discouraged. We've got to make sure that we take time to refresh our body and refresh our spirit. I'll never forget the very first church that I was a youth pastor in. The pastor would always say, if you don't take time apart, you will come apart. If you don't take time to just relax and refresh yourself, then you're just going to fly all to pieces. So I encourage you to do that in your life, and even in ministry. You know, we can take a little bit of a break, or at least just pace yourself so you don't burn yourself out. But then again, I hear preachers all the time say, a lot of people are really focused on burning out, or really closer to rusting out than they are burning out, right? Those that usually burn out are the ones that don't talk about burning out. They just burn so hard that they're spent. But and I'm not encouraging anybody to drop out of ministry or anything like that. Pastor of a church would never say anything like that. But just make sure that you look after yourself physically and emotionally, and take some time off, take some vacation. I know there's been many years in my life, in the life of a church, that I haven't always used all my vacation time, because I was like, I don't need vacation, especially when it was just me and Melody, right? We didn't need all that much vacation. A little bit different with kids. But you should take time. You should take time apart. I had a buddy of mine, I was talking to him about it one time, and he said, vacation is not always about you. Sometimes it's about your family. Even in ministry, we got to take vacation and let our families know that they're important, and that we need to take some time off and spend some time with them. And that works in your secular life as well. So let's continue reading there in verse 13. Therefore, I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall and at the openings, and I set the people according to their families and their swords and their spears and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the leaders and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Speaking of the opposition there, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. I think it's interesting here that Nehemiah, he's trying to offer some encouragement to these people that are discouraged. And where does he start? Where does he start? It's not by any chance that this list is put in here the way it is. He says he starts with the nobles, right? And then down to the leaders, and then down to the rest of the people. What does that tell me? Where does encouragement need to come from? It needs to come from the top, right? It needs to come from the top. Yeah. We as leaders and serving up, people need to hear our encouragement, right? Let's continue reading there. And it happened when our enemies heard it was known to us, and that God had brought their plot to nothing, that all of us returned to the wall, and everyone to his work. That's a good verse right there. And when our enemies had heard that their plot had come to nothing, that God had brought their plot to nothing. The people didn't do anything, right? The Jews didn't do anything. God brought their plot to nothing. So it was from that time on that half of my servants worked on construction, while the other half held spears and shields and bows and wore armor, and the leaders were behind all the house of Judah. Those who built on the wall and those who carried burdens loaded themselves, so that with one hand they worked at construction, and with the other they held a weapon. Every one of the builders had his sword girded at his side as he built, and the one who sounded the trumpet was beside me. Then I said to the nobles, the rulers, and the rest of the people, the work is great and extensive, and we are separated far from one another on the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we labored in the work, and half of the men held spears from the daybreak until the stars appeared. From the morning to the night, they were watching guard. At the same time, I also said to the people, let each man and his servant stay at night in Jerusalem. He didn't want them outside the walls, right, where they could be attacked. He wanted them inside the walls. Though they were not up, they were a lot better than what they had outside of Jerusalem. That they may be our guard by night, and a hard-working party, and a working party by day. So neither I, my brethren, my servants, nor the men of my guard who followed me took off our clothes, except that everyone took them off for washing. Nehemiah was in touch with his people. He was in touch with his people's discouragement. He was in touch with their fear. You know, good leaders are in touch with their people. Good leaders are concerned when their people are fearful, when their people are discouraged, when their people are hurting. Good leaders are aware of that, and they minister to those and they address those things. All my years of youth ministry, one of my biggest things was that we know what is going on in the lives of our students, right? And when you run in a youth group of 35, 45 kids, it's hard to do that. But, we had youth leaders that were in touch with their lives, and then they could report back to me, because it's important that we know what is going on in the lives of the people that we are trying to minister to. And I don't know how Nehemiah stayed on top of it, but he was aware of their fear, and he was aware of their discouragement, and he responded. He responded with faith. He said, "Listen," he said, God will fight for us, right? If we get attacked, the trumpet will blow, and God will fight for us. So he responded in faith, but he also had a strategy, right? He said, "Listen, everybody's going to have a sword on them, right? We're going to have bows, and we're going to have spears, and they're going to be ready to guard from the morning until the night." So he was a man of faith, but he also was a man of strategy. And once again, he made sure everybody was in their right place, and they were working on the wall. Once again, dragging them back, pointing them back to the task of rebuilding the walls. Nehemiah was there to offer encouragement to those people that were suffering with discouragement. It's awful beneficial in ministry when you've got so many people talking negative, to have a person come alongside of you and offer some encouragement. So I just encourage you, if somebody's out and discouraged, come alongside them and offer some encouragement. Try to build them up. This world is doing all it can to tear us down. And the truth of the matter is, we live out in the world, right? We show up to church on Sundays and Wednesday. That ought to be a place for us to be encouraged and us to be built up and not have to hear negativity and hear discouragement. Nehemiah encouraged the people with the words that he spoke. What did he say there in verse 14? He says, "And I looked and arose and said," he looked. He was in tune with what was going on. He saw what was going on. He looked and he said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, "Do not be afraid of them." Don't be afraid of the adversaries. Don't be afraid of the opposition. "Remember the Lord great and awesome." I didn't even know awesome was in the Bible until a number of years ago, right? Thought that was just a hip, cool word. Well, it was hip and cool when I was around. I don't know if it's hip and cool anymore. Probably not. But awesome is in the Bible. "Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses." So he positioned the people, and he told them, he said, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid." If you're tempted to be afraid, remember the Lord. Remember the Lord great and awesome. And he also said, "And fight for each other." Fight for each other. We as Christians, we as members of Fellowship Baptist Church, this local assembly of believers, need to be ready to fight for each other. Right? If I hear that one of my friends is struggling in some kind of sin and I catch word of it, I need to call him up for coffee or a meal or something like that and try to encourage my friend to redirect his path. That's fighting for my brother, right? That's battling with them. Certainly if I know that there's something going on amongst my friends or amongst my fellow believers, my fellow church members, and there's somebody that's being attacked, I need to fight for them. I need to stand up and encourage them. We need to fight for each other. It says, "Then when their enemies heard of what had been done, that God had brought their plot to nothing, the people began working again." They got busy again. They had been discouraged, overwhelmed, tired, but then they saw God show up. They saw God foil the plots of these that sought to do them harm, and it motivated them to get back at the work that needed to be done. Nehemiah prepared for battle by putting some to work while others guarded. Those that I don't know how you swing a trowel to lay bricks and then swing a sword at the same time. I don't know what that would look like, right? but they had one hand doing construction and one hand ready for battle. And I've already kind of alluded to this, but Nehemiah said, at the first sign of trouble, we're going to sound the trumpet. He said, and we're all going to come together, and we're going to fight strong, and we're going to beat these guys. Is that what he said? He said, when the trumpet sounds, we're all going to come together, and God will fight for us. Right? They worked from daylight. They slept in the city, fully clothed, fully ready for battle, right? Listen, be ready for what might happen at any time, right? Nehemiah said, we didn't take our clothes off except to bathe, is what he said. And once again, I think that's interesting. You know, Nehemiah was here with them. He was with them in the trenches. He says in verse 23, so neither I, my brethren, my servants, nor the men of guard who followed me took off our clothes, except that everyone took them off for washing. They took their clothes off to take a bath. But he said, we were already, Nehemiah grouped him. Nehemiah was in the trenches there with the people. We talked about how this Nehemiah is about good leadership. Good leaders get in the trenches with the people. How do you know what's going on in the trenches unless you're in the trenches? Right? It's easy to stand up there on the side and look at the trenches and say, well, you should do this and you should do that. It's easy to stand on the outside and criticize. But good leaders get down in the trenches with the people, and they work and serve together. Don't get me wrong. You know, I know that Nehemiah said they had swords and they had bows and they had spears and they put men to guard. But Nehemiah's strategy, was not a substitute for God's divine assistance. Nehemiah balanced a trust in God and the sovereignty of God with a recognition for the people to do some work, the human responsibility, right? The Bible, I think it's clear, the Bible says, if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. Can God provide us without us working? Can God provide without us working? Yeah, but he expects us to work, right? Even when he brought down manna in the wilderness, right? He didn't put it on their plates and put it on their shelves for them, right? He discouraged them not to put it on the shelves, right? Because it would go bad, right? Just get enough for that day. But he didn't put it on the plate for them. He told them to go out and get it, right? Nehemiah said, we're going to trust in God, but we're going to do what God expects us to do, and we're going to be ready. We're going to be prepared for battle. Oliver Cromwell, an English military and political leader, also believed in God, but he said this. He said, we will trust in God and keep our gunpowder dry. Right? We're going to trust in God, but we're going to be prepared. Right? Psalms 127:1 says, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. We labor, but God is the one that makes things happen. There will always be opposition to progress in the work of God. So we have to be prepared. We have to have a prepared defense, because that is vital to our success. We've got to trust in God, but also be prepared. I sort of summarized Nehemiah's plan of defense for the attacks of the opposition. And it also works for our attacks and the attacks of Satan. First, we need to be praying to God. We need to be praying to God. We need to be prepared for the battle. We need to continue to work and serve. And we need to be ready to defend one another. That was the plan. Pray. Be prepared for the battle. Be prepared for and we fight a spiritual battle, right? I think it's very clear in the Bible that we are in spiritual warfare each and every single day. There are no non-combatants in God's army. Okay, everybody is in that battle. When you roll out of bed in the morning, you need to understand that you're in a spiritual battle. You need to be prepared for that. That doesn't necessarily mean going out here and buying a gun, right? Even though I like guns, there's nothing wrong with having guns. But we got to be prepared for spiritual battle. Be in God's Word, reading God's Word, studying God's Word, talking about God. So we pray to God, we prepare for battle, we continue to work, and we defend one another. If we're going to endure discouragement, this is our application for tonight. If we're going to endure discouragement in ministry, if we're going to be able to move past that halfway mark, which is where these people are tonight, we've got to remember that it takes spiritual vision, right? What did Nehemiah say? Remember our God. Remember our Lord, how awesome He is. We've got to keep our spiritual vision. We've got to keep our eyes on God. We can't lose sight of that. Martin Luther, the reformer, had been struggling with discouragement for weeks. One day his wife entered his study dressed in complete black. Martin asked her, he said, "Who died?" And she said, "God has died." And he jumped up and he said, "God has not died." And then she said, "Why don't you act like He's alive then?" When we get discouraged, right, we tend to think that God is not around, that maybe God has died. God is not dead. He is very much alive, and He has power, and we should look to Him for that power. So keep focused on what is important. Keep focused on God. Be stubborn in your faith. Be stubborn in your faith. I met some stubborn people in my life. We as Christians need to be stubborn in our faith, headstrong, not backing down when it comes to our faith. We must insist on helping others while denying ourselves. You know, that we have those people in our lives that need help, right? They need ministering to. I got a call today. I haven't even shared this with Melody because we really haven't talked at all today. We've been running so much today, but I got a call from one of our former neighbors who he lived next door to us, and he would often need rides and need money and stuff like that. So much so that me and my wife kept money in the safe just for him. That was his money, you know, and he paid it back and we put it back in there. So when he needed it again, we could take it back out, right? He kind of let his drug addiction get a hold of us. He was sharing with me today, and he's just really having a hard time. You know, he called me and asked me if I could get him some clothes because he doesn't have any clothes. I guess he probably ended up in jail and all of his stuff got gone. Maybe his girlfriend at that time trashed it or whatever, but he called me and asked me about that today. And when we lived next door, he would always come over and ask for rides. He'd always come over and ask for money. My wife can tell you we'd be laying in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he'd come knocking on our door at 3 o'clock in the morning for some money. And sometimes we just didn't have it on us. I had to go to the ATM. That's why we started putting money in the safe, so I didn't have to go to the ATM at 3 a.m. But he was. I don't know. It almost sometimes it felt like a nuisance. You know what I mean, like an aggravation. You know, but. We got to be careful that we don't put walls around our hearts as well. You know, we go through stuff in our lives, but we need to be compassionate to those that are around us and compassionate to those that have needs. C.S. Lewis wrote this. He says, if you want to make sure of keeping your heart intact, you must give it to no one. Wrap it carefully around hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up in the safe coffin of your selfishness. But in the casket safe, dark, motionless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable. We need to make sure that in ministry and service, you know, when things aren't going the way we would like them to in our lives, that we are still compassionate to those around us. And you say, well, it's inconvenient to get involved. It's inconvenient to open the door like that because some people will certainly take advantage, and I felt like at times he did take advantage of us. But that's not what God desires for us. He doesn't want us to have that hardened heart. He wants us to have that compassionate heart. And I just encourage you to keep an eye on that in ministry, that you don't become so indifferent to the concerns of people that ministry is just something that you just do. You just go about it. You just jump through the motions, because that's not the heart that God desires for us to have in ministry. So next week, we're going to look at chapter 5. So Lord willing, we're going to cover the whole chapter 5 next week. And so we're going to see this third wave of opposition. This happens for me. The the opposition that we see in chapter 5 happens from within the walls. The people start taking advantage of their brothers and sisters, right? And Nehemiah has to say, whoa, this is not going to happen, right? And then the next week, we see, I think it's chapter 6. Yeah, it's chapter 6. They try to kill Nehemiah, right? They try to put a scheme together to do away with him. So when Satan puts you on a hit list, you know you're doing something right, right? All right. That's it for our Bible study. Now, unless anybody's got any questions or comments or anything like that. Anybody? We covered a lot of verses, and we probably just went maybe 5-10 minutes longer than we usually do. So that's good. All right. Any special mentions of prayer? I got to visit with Jolene Hughes.